Welcome back, This is the first of many, many conversations we will be having here as spring training opens in Sarasota, Florida. Luke Jones is welcome down there in Sarasota. I am not. We are both broadcasting from here because, quite frankly, Luke, there's not a lot going on right now with the Orioles. I've called it an embarrassing offseason, but I don't know that I've watched these people for a quarter of a century now, more than half of my life. I don't know that anything brings shame upon them, certainly not in the offseason when it comes to making money, but this is not a baseball team that anyone believes is going to compete this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I'm not going to disagree with you. I think you look at what's happened or what hasn't happened this offseason. For me, it's not even about being competitive this year or competing this year. How about showing that you have some semblance of a direction? I've said already, I wrote this 2 months ago when the first reports of Manny Machado being shopped were out there. Even if they had signed Lance Lynn and Alex Cobb, I'm still not sure it matters in the AL East with where the Yankees are at this point, with where Boston is at this point, with where the Orioles are with their other deficiencies that are there. I mean, every team's going to have weaknesses. I mean, as much as you talk about the starting rotation, the bullpen's not going to be as strong, at least until Zach Britton comes back, and who knows when that happens, who knows how he's going to look. You look around the diamond, I mean, they're still looking for a left-handed hitting outfielder. There's still questions as far as if Tim Beckham can play third base and Machado at shortstop. So they have so many different questions, and even if they had made a decision to say, okay, it's time to reboot this thing a little bit. We're going to trade Manny Machado. Well, they can't trade Zach Britton because he got hurt. Maybe they can do that at some point, but they've had opportunities to, and they haven't for whatever reason, whether they didn't want to or the right deal never did manifest. But it really is a case of what exactly are you doing? What exactly is the plan? How exactly should fans be preparing themselves to watch this product? You know, is it a young, reloading team? Is it a team that's supposedly trying to make another run? Well, nothing that they've done gives you any evidence to support either of those theories. So, you know, we've talked about it. If you're going to keep the band together for one more run, then make a run. Go sign a couple good starting pitchers and see what happens then. And if you're going to start rebuilding, which I think from my standpoint with my baseball expertise, for whatever that's worth, is just someone who's watched the game for a long time and has covered this team for several years and know where they're heading after 2018. If you want to rebuild, that's fine. I think there's absolutely strong arguments to do that. But the absolute worst thing you can do is just to continue to punt and not do anything and be in this stuck-in-between territory. I think the reality is this team's starting rotation was so bad last year with Ubaldo Jimenez and Wade Miley and Chris Tillman and then Jeremy Hellickson thrown in over the final 2 months, who did not pitch well when he came to Baltimore, that the crazy thing is you might be able to plug in just minor league-type guys and be better than 2 or 3 of those guys. But that being said, it's clearly not going to be good enough to truly be competitive in this division. And you know what? You might be in a position where you kind of, sort of, like last year, statistically speaking, mathematically speaking, hanging around in that wild card race, but we know that's fool's gold. So even if you talk about that context and not trading Manny Machado and Zach Britton still being part of this team and Brad Brock still being part of this team and Adam Jones, and go down the list of all their free agent to-bes, the scariest thing is that they don't do a whole lot to address their starting pitching, and yet they're still hanging around just enough that they don't sell at the end of July. I mean, to me, that's the most nightmarish scenario you could come up with. And to this point, you can kind of point and say, well, there's still a lot of starting pitchers out on the market, and there are. But knowing how the Orioles typically operate, even when they've been good over the last 5 to 6 years, and they've had this period of success until late last year, where things really fell. The transmission fell out of the car. They've been competitive, but they've always waited, and even though you can use that excuse that there are a lot of players, a lot of starting pitchers still out there, the problem is with that, yeah, there's more supply, but there's also much more demand than what they're accustomed to in February and March when they've made some of these moves in recent years. So, long story short, this is, I mean, I don't know how you want to characterize it, but in no way is it positive. I mean, it's, you could call it disastrous, you can call it maddening, whatever it is. For me,
how about this, man? You cover the team, right? Like, I consider you as strong an expert on the Baltimore Orioles and the history of the Orioles as anyone I've ever known. Who's going to pitch? Like, honestly, right now, it's Valentine's week. Spring training's open. They're out on their Twitter. You know, all the media types are down there, tweeting about their shorts and their sandals and showing palm trees. Who do they have to pitch? Like, who will be their 5 starters right now, if you had to guess? And this isn't just an Oriole problem. This is a disgrace to all these baseball teams that have allowed 100 Major League Baseball players to do the Homestead Homie thing again this year. The whole sport's a disgrace at this point.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Disgrace might not be
half the teams
right
aren't trying to win right now. Half the teams are going this Houston Astro route which it really means we're going to spend less money and we might win if we have a strategy.
Now
maybe.
That said, does that mean every team that's going to be bad should just spend just to spend? I mean, I'm asking. I mean, is that your expectation?
No, it's not. But the expectation of I'm paying you for a baseball team through my cable bill and that you're not lowering prices in a year when you're doing the 2-for-1 special, in a year when it's February and I know you can't win, and I could go through Major League Baseball and give you 15 teams right now that absolutely cannot win. Look, in the NBA, you can give you 25 teams that can't win. I mean, the Wizards are 15 games over 500 and they can't win. So, I mean, I'll hear all of that, but there comes a point where when you have 81 home games and you have really a transcendent player like Machado and you can't even put a bobblehead out because you know you're going to trade him, it's not very comforting to a fan base here that hasn't had a parade since 1983, which, by the way, that means your lifetime, Luke, because you were born the week before they won the World Series.
Yeah, I was 2 weeks old, but
and how old are you now?
I'm 34 years old.
Yeah. It's been a little while, hadn't it?
Sure.
Guess what? You're going to be 35 this time next year, and they're still not going to have a parade here. Well, and in between now and then, they're going to come asking for your orange carpet and your green money. And it's February, and if they had to field a Major League Baseball team tomorrow, they don't have 5 Major League Baseball pitchers. They don't. They didn't have 5 They didn't have 2 last year, based on the ERAs.
Well, Kevin Gausman pitched really well the second half of the season. I guess maybe you'd say 1.5.
Oh, fair enough. Okay. Well, that's no way to go through the American League East, son.
But that said, Kevin Gausman's a legitimate Major League starting pitcher. I mean,
I'll give you him. I'll give you Bundy. Now, who pitches on Wednesday?
Those two. And then after that, it's a lot of questions. There's no question about that. I'm not going to dispute that. That's the captain obvious.
They don't even have a plan to lie to you about. Like, literally, usually they're like Sarah Sanders. They can lie and just sort of make it up as they go along. I don't think they have a name for 4 and 5 right now. Buck doesn't even know what's going on.
I think there are names that they're hoping for. I think they're hoping that, probably not Alex Cobb and Lance Lynn, but guys like Vargas, guys like Andrew Kastner that are still out there. I mean, but that's their built-in excuse right now. I mean, those names are still out there. Do they end up coming away with one of them? I'll say sure. I'll right now, as we're talking in mid-February, as pitchers and catchers are reporting, I do think they're going to sign at least one veteran starting pitcher. Now, I don't think it's going to necessarily be a guy that's a difference maker. I think Andrew Kastner, to me, that feels like Yabani Gallardo all over again a couple years later. If you look at some of his peripherals last year, that went along with, albeit a good ERA, but...
Well, there's a reason all these guys are out there, right?
Well, but we've debated the reason why all these guys are out there.
Look, I wouldn't have given you Darvish that money either because he's not going to help this team. I guess for the Cubs, he's going to make a nice number 3, right, or number 4, or whatever he's going to be, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, well, you just said I'm not going to give money, but that's kind of what we're seeing with all these teams right now. You have these teams that aren't as good. That I think a lot of teams are starting to wise up to the reality of what I just said 10 minutes ago, that the second wild card is fool's gold unless you have the rare instance like a Colorado and Arizona this past year, where you had two really, really good wild card teams. I think that kind of run away and hide. I think in these cases where the second wild card teams hang around, I think that's where there's fool's gold. That's why the Orioles got into trouble last year. They got into trouble in 2015 with that. I'm wondering if there are some teams that have wised up to that. But we've talked about the possibility of collusion. I mean, there's something fishy going on. I don't think all these executives, all these owners suddenly got really smart and realized that free agents are bad investments in so many cases, because that's been known for years. That's not a big secret. So I think with Darvish finally signing, with Kane finally, having signed a couple weeks ago, you have a big name, and even arguably the top starting pitcher and the top position player on the market, with J.D. Martinez probably having something to say about that. But with those two players having now signed, you would think this market starts to move a little bit more. But again, I'll go back to what I said about the Orioles a little bit earlier. The fact that they haven't made moves yet, that's nothing different than what we've seen even over the last 5 or 6 years. The difference is, there's more supply on the market right now, and you might say that's a good thing, but you have many more teams that are still going to be looking to fill holes. I don't think all of these free agents are going to go into the season unsigned. I think you're going to start seeing movement here over the next 2 to 3 weeks especially, and most of these guys will end up having jobs by, say, the second week of March. But with the way the Orioles operate, and I think the big question here is, you look at where their payroll was last year, up over $150 million, the highest payroll in club history. They had money that came off the books. They should have some cash that they can be spending, and to this point, they haven't done it. So, again, it goes back to, we don't hear from ownership. Dan Duquette has sent out major mixed messages as far as what this team's trying to do. You can keep talking all you want about, we realize we need starting pitching. At some point, you need to go at it. And if you expect you're just going to add it on a bunch of one-year contracts, well, you know what? You're going to get Chris Tillman then, which, okay, if Chris Tillman's your number 6 starter competing for a roster spot, that kind of a scenario, maybe a guy who competes to be the final member of your rotation, that's fine. But if you sign him and you try to bill him as your number 3 starter, I mean, you're going to be a laughing stock, and that's where the Orioles find themselves right now. And it's a shame because, the start of spring training is a time that usually you like that. It's optimism and the start of spring and all those different narratives that we've heard over the years, and those that are romantic about baseball know very well. But there's not anything to celebrate with this club right now, and it's just a whole lot of frustration. Like I said, if you're going for it, then truly go for it. And if not, then start making
show the fans a plan. But they look, there's never been any transparency with this organization, which is why I don't have a media pass, right? They don't want guys like me asking questions like, do you have a plan around here, or giving them criticism for an off season, which was a disgrace. I mean, I don't, if you're charging full price and you're saying we're a legitimate American League East team, or a legitimate Major League Baseball team, and we competed, we went to the ALCS. Well, where's the plan? And nothing has been said. They have a lame duck manager. They have a lame duck general manager. They have a lame duck center fielder. They have a lame duck shortstop, third baseman, whatever you're going to call him. They have a lame duck guy in the bullpen who can't pitch. They have another lame duck guy in the bullpen who can pitch. And, they have other questions above and beyond, if they were competitive, beyond the pitching, like catcher, like signing scope, like where's Chris Davis going to bat, and what kind of productivity is he going to get? What are you going to do with Trumbo? I mean, there's so many things to discuss, but I think for all of us, it begins with smart guys like you and me. It begins with, is the old man senile? Is he out to lunch? Is he still alive? Is he weekend at Bernie's? Where the hell is he? Where are the kids? Who's running the team? And then on top of that, we all talk about the pitching. They've got 5 other holes on the team beyond number 3, 4, and 5 starter, right?
Well, I don't know. 5 might be a little bit on the high side, but they clearly have some other holes that they'd like to address. I mean, unless you're ready to make Austin Hayes your everyday right fielder, which, by the way, compared to what they would most likely bring in, I'm not so sure I'm opposed to that idea, quite frankly. But I'm also someone that's leaning much more towards the side of looking towards the future and not really all that concerned with 2018 from a standpoint of I don't think they're going to be all that terribly good. I don't think they're going to be 100-loss bad either, but it's impossible almost at this point to look at a path where they're competitive and really hanging around closely and not just in that kind of sort of mathematical territory that they were in last year at the trade deadline in 2015, times when they should have sold, quite frankly, and they didn't. So, I mean, it really is. It's frustrating from that standpoint.
Well, it's heavy math, right? It's calculus because the mistakes compound themselves. When you have a Machado, when you have a Britton, when you have those guys and you don't deal them the way, let's say, the White Sox dealt Sale, or even the Astros in the way that they've rebuilt, or the Royals, any of the small market teams. The compounding part of this is there's no one running the place. There's no one with a long-term view to deal Machado for whomever, because Dan Duquette's not going to be here to see those seeds sprout anyway.
Well, and take it a step further. I mean, Dan Duquette is not under contract after this year. Buck Showalter, who I think there is still very much possibility that he's around after this year. I don't feel that way about Duquette at this point. I don't know that for certain. That's just my gut. But you also have an owner who's in his late 80s. So even if, regardless of just how plugged in Peter Angelos is, he's certainly not someone that's thinking about the long-term outlook of this ball club. It would appear nothing they've done would make you think that. But
he's just trying to stay alive and upright on the planet at this point.
But at the same time, for those of us, people that are clamoring for this team to add starting pitching, if you do that, there's a better chance then that the Orioles are in it in late July. And if they're in it in late July, they're not trading Manny Machado then. They're not trading Zach Britton then. So unless you truly, in your heart of hearts, feel that Alex Cobb and Lance Lynn, which, look, I'd be shocked if they signed one of those guys, let alone two. Unless you really think those are the final two pieces that put the Orioles right with the Yankees and the Red Sox, which I don't. But if you do, fine. If you don't, honestly, and this goes back to what I said about this team not having a direction, as a fan, if I were just talking about this as a fan and not as a guy who covers the team and not as a guy who talks about the team on the radio for a living, I don't know what I would want them to do at this point from a filling out the rest of their roster. Yeah, you'd like to see more starting pitching. It's a punchline. They have two starters right now. But at the same time, if you add Alex Cobb or if you add Lance Lynn or if you add Jason Vargas or you add Andrew Kashner or two of those aforementioned names, then I very well could buy the idea that they're at least in the second wild card race in late July, even if that's complete fool's gold in most cases. And if they do that, I don't see Peter Angelos trading Manny Machado at that point. So if you're someone that is more concerned about the future, maybe secretly you should be happy that they're not, to this point they haven't signed starting pitching, because it definitely decreases the likelihood of them being in the race in late July. And, if they're completely out of it and they're 10 games out of the second wild card and they're 18 games out of first place at that point, you would hope that they would definitely move Machado then. So, I mean, it is really sad from a standpoint of some of the issues that you just brought up a few minutes ago, some of the other actual baseball issues, actual roster issues as far as the incumbents that this ball club does have. It's something that you almost feel like it's wasted breath talking about right now because of the utter lack of direction and the utter lack of even filling out a starting rotation at this point. But again, if you are someone that's more concerned about the future, maybe secretly it's good that they haven't signed some starting pitching, because it just decreases the likelihood that they're going to be in a position where the ownership's going to say, well, we're not going to trade Manny Machado. We got a chance to win the second wild card. So
wasted breath. I love that, by the way. I'm going to use that all year. I wasted 12 years of breath on the Orioles. For over a decade, they were completely irrelevant, and here they stand again where the feeling is they're going to be completely irrelevant this year. And then it becomes wasted breath about who's going to do this, what difference does it make if you're going to win 74 games? Who's going to do what Machado's going to hit, and how much money Chris Davis is going to make? I mean, it was like talking about Jay Payton or Kevin Millwood or Sidney Ponson. When you stink, it's all wasted breath. It's all wasted time, as Don Henley would say.
Well,
right?
I don't agree with that. When you stink from a standpoint of you are rebuilding and building for the future, and you stink because you have young players and prospects that need to more seasoning and to mature, that's a little bit different for me. I know that the common fan who's just going out there to see Manny Machado, and let's keep in mind, it's not like the ballpark's been completely filled with Manny Machado on this club the last couple years, as attendance has certainly been a big topic of discussion. But my point is, and this is what I said at the beginning of our discussion, pick a direction. The worst thing you can be is stink, but you're in this, and you're in between. You're not really rebuilding.
Stink, but think you got a shot at the second wild card. Right,
yeah,
exactly.
I mean, that's just the worst place to be. I said this to you in December when we were talking about the potential trade partners for Machado and all the different speculation that was out there, the different reports that were out there. And I said at that point, if you trade Machado, I'm all on board for that. I would have been starting that process a year ago and looking to move him.
Well, you and I have been talking about it for at least 2 years, really.
Yeah, so, but that said, if you trade him, don't sell me on the idea that you're trying to compete in 2018, because that's counterintuitive. I mean, that's counterproductive. If you want to be competitive in 2018, I don't see a path with Manny Machado not being in that equation. So it really is. That's what's frustrating about this. We're kind of talking in the context of, they need starting pitching, but even if they add some of that starting pitching, are you really that sold that it's going to be good enough? And that's where you run into that territory that you are stuck in between, and you're not good enough, but you're not so bad that we see a repeat of 2015. We see a repeat of last season where the Orioles didn't sell. They ended up falling well short, and they had nothing to show for it. I mean, we've talked about it. This is revisionist history. Let's just take a trip down memory lane, just recent memory. 2015, this team was out of it. We talked about the idea that they should have sold, but they were a handful of games out of the second wild card, even though they had shown very little evidence throughout the year that they were consistent enough to be a playoff team. And they could have sold off Chris Davis. They could have sold off Darren O'Day. They could have sold off Matt Wieters. They could have sold off Wei-Yin Chen. And I'm not saying you would have gotten a king's ransom for those four individuals, but you would like to think you could have come away with a couple pieces, right? I mean, that's reasonable when you consider where those guys were at that point in their career. Instead, what happened? Wei-Yin Chen walks. Matt Wieters takes a qualifying offer a year later, makes a lot of money, doesn't give them a whole lot of value, and then he walks in free agency last offseason. Chris Davis gets a big contract, and now we're wondering if he's going to be even be above replacement level over the next couple of years, let alone being a productive player worthy of a $161 million contract. And Darren O'Day, who had been an absolute rock for his first 4 years with the Orioles, hasn't been able to stay healthy ever since he signed that contract. So even just go back 3 years, 2.5 years now, and if the Orioles had sold at that point, think about, okay, maybe they come away with a couple pieces there, and think how much more financial flexibility they would have had over the last 2 to 3 years to perhaps sign, if not a Manny Machado, certainly would have been helpful in signing Jonathan Scope long term, which is still something that I suppose is up in the air, but the clock's ticking there too. He's 2 years away from free agency. So it just really shows how some of these decisions that just quite frankly were never made, and they just punt and they just kick the can down the road. Well, the clock's ticking, and it's ticking louder and louder as they're getting to the end of 2018, and they're going to go off the cliff if they don't proceed here carefully. So that's where I kind of, as much as you look at the starting rotation and look at the lack of movement this year, that's where I kind of, I lose interest in that, and I start focusing much more on the absolute big picture for this team. And I don't think, like I said, they could sign 2 starting pitchers, and I still don't know if it would necessarily matter. But I am very much concerned for the long-term well-being of this franchise, and that's where I'm very much concerned that you end up not trading Machado and he walks for a draft pick instead of even being able to get a couple good pieces, even if it's not your dream trade return. Same with Zach Britton, if he does get back on the field, and it sounds like he's on schedule to pitch before the All-Star break. But that's a long way to go there. Go down the list. Brad Brock, we've talked about it. This team hasn't even had a conversation with Adam Jones. I mean, a guy who's been here a decade, a guy who has been, dare I say, the most important Oriole since maybe Cal Ripken. I don't know.
But you know what the plan is for him? The plan is for him at the end of the year. Well, maybe deal him in July or whatever, but the plan would be this time next year, he'll be the 30-something washed-up outfielder that'll want a 3-year deal at $18 million a year, won't be getting it, right? I mean, if this were his walk year, he wouldn't be signed right now. He would be the guy sitting out there waiting around, right? I mean, that's what they've done to players like him at the whole of Major League Baseball this offseason, right?
Well, it's why I've said to you, I don't know if I've said this on the air, but I've said it to you privately. I mean, the next CBA comes up, watch out, because you can already tell it looks like baseball is preparing for a war in that way. I think you're going to see
they didn't prepare for it. They started the war, right? I mean, this offseason has begun. Well, the war has started. I mean, literally, the drag on salaries, it's not real or imagined. It's beyond, it's sitting in front of you. We don't have to make it up.
Regardless of how you think it's come to be, it's certainly sitting right there in front of you. And, but at the same time, I'll also point the finger to the union and say, what happened to the baseball union? I mean, this had been the strongest union in pro sports for decades upon decades. And, well, you look at what they've given up over the last CBA or two, and how they basically allowed the luxury tax to become a cap. It very much is fascinating. It's not something that I think most baseball fans necessarily care a whole lot about, but most baseball fans also see the free agents that are just sitting there as we're opening camps around Florida and Arizona for spring training, and guys still don't have jobs. I mean, it's definitely unsettling, and you have to think, the union's going to be looking at this and saying, all right, baseball, owners, you don't want to pay free agents that are in their late 20s and into their 30s, that's fine. Well, we're going to have a fight here and try to kind of turn the whole pay structure upside down in terms of, arbitration, 6 years of club control, all those things. I imagine baseball is going to at least attempt, or the union's going to at least attempt to fight those things, and if that happens, no way not to think there won't be a significant work stoppage. But again, we're a few years away from that. But in the meantime, we're having non-team affiliated camps even opening up, so these free agents can get some work in. What a time to be alive if you're a baseball fan.
He is Luke Jones. We shall be bringing more rays of sunshine like this to you all season long, just not from Sarasota, from gloomy Baltimore here. He is Luke at WNST.net. Baltimore Luke out on Twitter for all the Orioles' comings and goings over the next 6 weeks as opening day looms, not in April, but in March, at the end of March, on a Thursday, no less. So if you're not aware of that, you may want to go check out the Orioles' spring training calendar. I'm sure all the games will be on Masson as well. You can find me out on the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Our morning newspaper ships directly to your email inbox at 7 a.m. every morning. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness at planetfitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life, guaranteed. Our tech service is there so that when the Orioles do sign a third starter, a fourth starter, a fifth starter, sixth starter, all that they're going to need, you're going to get that first in the WNST tech service. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And, of course, Dennis will be here on Thursday driving you home, getting you ready for the weekend and for Indianapolis and the draft. Luke and I will be out in Indy 2 weeks from now as well. Appreciate Dennis and the SSV on WNST, heard from 3 until 5 on Thursdays. All of our WNST programming here brought to you by our friends at Howard Bank, sponsoring our Super Bowl coverage, as well as our friends at Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast, and the Maryland Jockey Club, where they're racing this weekend at Laurel, and you'll find the entries out at WNST.net as well. I am Nestor. Nasty at WNST.net always finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, anywhere your mobile device goes, WNST travels with you. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST.net. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports and whatever else we feel like talking.